those few building blocks on the path are really important ones for getting into a place of wholeness in relationships, of maturation, of a new kind of relationship that can meet your needs. Hello, and welcome to The Things That Come Between Us. I am your host, Charu Morgan, and I've been working with couples and individuals for almost 20 years, supporting them in feeling more connected to their own body, their sexuality, and their partners. On this podcast, we are talking about the things that come between us and our desire to really deeply connect with other people. Thank you so much for being here and joining me. If anything that I'm saying really lands for you in a way where you're wanting more support, I offer private one-on-one sessions where you can get customized support with what's going on in your relationship, your sex life, your relationship to your own sexuality. In the podcast, I'm speaking generally about things. And the great thing about working with me one-on-one is that I can help you with your specific needs and navigate the nuance of your personal experience with you and give you the hand-holding that you need to get to your next level. Sessions are offered virtually or in person in the Northern California area and can be done weekly, or I also offer immersions for those wanting more of a deep dive. To find out more information, you can go to charumorgan.com/sessions, and we will link to that in the show notes. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about what I'm going to say is the single biggest thing that affects your sex life and relationships. Yeah, I know. It's a good one, right? We all want to know what is the single biggest thing. And so this is a complex subject matter, and I'm more or less dividing it into 3 parts to make it as easy as possible to understand. And throughout the episode, I'm going to keep cycling around through each of those aspects of this. And so one aspect is we're going to be looking at how you've become who you are, what you decided you needed to do for love or to get your needs met, and essentially getting to know your inner little and their motivations for their actions. Don't worry, I'm going to explain that more, but that would be the first aspect. The second aspect will be your relationship with your inner little. So how do we develop that relationship? How do we cultivate that relationship? Where's that relationship at right now? And then the aspects of you that you are bringing into your relationships and sex life. So those are the 3 different things. And essentially, we're just talking about how they are all deeply interconnected. That how you've become who you are, what you decided you needed to do in order to receive love, having a relationship with the young part of you that made those decisions and has those very young motivators of how they're getting their needs met, creating a relationship with that part of you, and then the you that you are bringing into your sex life and relationships. Those 3 aspects. So in my last episode, I talked about in the beginning some ways that we may have developed a hypersensitivity to those around us when we were young in order to get certain needs met, and then maybe developed a capacity to fulfill to fulfill what they needed, to fulfill those needs as a way of making sure that our own needs got met. And I think that this is opening a door for a really interesting inquiry. And it circles through, I think, a lot of my episodes. They are circles that overlap with each other. I think you call that a Venn diagram. And of all the different themes that I cover and how the constructs that we've built from our young life in order to make sure we got our needs met, oftentimes for survival, taking into consideration that our families and our caretakers are imperfect. They're navigating their own challenges, their own young life imprints, and then they're being with us based on those imprints. And we all have strategies from childhood that have then become the strategies that we have taken with us into adulthood. And initially, those strategies were put in place for us to, like I said before, make sure that we get our needs met, including the need for love, intimacy, connection, which is also a basic human need that somehow I feel like our culture tries to sweep under the rug. It is incredibly important for our survival. And then we're looking at how all of this integrates into who we are sexually, who we are in relationships, the kind of intimacy we get to experience, and also the kind of intimacy that may seem out of reach for us. And so, of course, all of this also overlaps into a larger cultural context, and I'm not going to go into that in this episode but it's just important to note that our culture also affects these things. And so I just thought, there's something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while, which is this most central piece to who you are going to be as a lover, as in what happens when you make love, what happens when you have relationships and share love. And I think one of the biggest influences on who we are in those circumstances, in those relationships, stems from that young life and how we evolve. It stems from this other really important thing, which is the deepest relationship with ourselves. And what I've seen is that many of the people that I work with, and of course, all of this, take what resonates for you, let go of what doesn't. This is certainly not true for everyone. But many of us, when we become conscious of our relationship, our internal relationship, the relationship to the voices in our head, oftentimes those voices are telling us, there's often a lot of cruelty. There's oftentimes an internalized cruelty. And that could be because it's the voice of a caretaker that we've imprinted. Oftentimes that's the case. And sometimes, and this is probably also from the imprint of a caretaker, but sometimes it's a voice we've created inside of ourselves to propel us to things that had to happen. And again, a lot of times, this is just a way that we were maneuvering to try to get a need met. And I think that also culturally, there's just this baseline that somehow almost like this harsh, angry, unrelenting, uncompromising voice internally, almost like this angry drill sergeant. There's this idea interlocked in some of us who have imprinted from our culture. It's this like we need to internally push us to our next level. We have to push to achieve and to be the best we can be. And sometimes that voice will even work. I'm someone who had a pretty harsh inner voice, and it drove me to create some really incredible accomplishments that I felt really proud of. And so it's not completely ineffective, but the cost of motivating myself with that voice from that space was really high. It was really high in that while I could externally accomplish things using that voice, it wasn't actually the best for my mental health. It was actually like it was taking, but it was also draining at the same time, if that makes sense. It was counterproductive. And so the biggest thing that I find when I'm helping people with what's going to happen for them in the bedroom and having the deepest, most satisfying, most fulfilling experience of lovemaking, of connection with someone they're dating, of connection with their partner, the most important thing that influences what they bring into those circumstances is the way that they are relating to the deepest parts of themselves. And again, for a lot of us, there's this meanness. There's this feeling of not being deserving of something, or something being wrong with us, or needing to prove that we are a good person or we are valuable. And often the self-talk, just to oversimplify, it might be like, I can't believe you act so stupid. And I think we would probably never talk to somebody that we really care about, or we certainly would try not to talk to someone we really care about, like a best friend, in that way. The greatest support and skill for the kind of care and satisfaction we're going to have in intimate relationships and in lovemaking is going to bloom from a deep care, respect, kindness, honoring of ourselves, of the child within ourselves, of the things we did to cope on our way to becoming who we are. A true belief and care. And I know that this is kind of cheesy, but in the inherent value of who we are, that we are okay, that we are allowed to have needs and take up space and make choices, and we're not wrong for those needs. And so a huge piece of work that I'm often doing with people is coming into relationship with this small one inside of us who somehow took on ideas of who we were supposed to be in order to cope, in order to get needs met. And maybe some of the voices and the relationship that we need to meet that young being, and we need to see what they felt they needed to do in order to be okay, in order to get those needs met. And then through that process, we can begin to care for them. We can begin to grow in compassion and care for that little being who just did their very best. And as we grow in that compassion and care, and as we grow in that relationship with them, we would begin to realize how deserving they are of care and respect. And the more we give them this side of ourself, this little being, the more we give them care, love, respect, the more they mature inside of us. And that maturation, maybe that wasn't ever able to happen from our young life to our adult life because of a million different things, but let's just say because of what we needed to do to cope. And we give them a chance to grow inside of our adult bodies as we learn to care for them and maybe reparent certain aspects. And more than anything, just give them space to feel and to be cared for. And the more that we give them that space to feel and to be cared for, the more we bring into our intimate relationships the whole of ourselves. And the more of ourselves, the more we take the time and realize how legitimate it is to know our own bodies and for that to be valid and important, the more we know that it's okay for our partner to tell us adjustments or needs that they have, and that that's valid and that's important. And that maybe I have feelings about those needs and adjustments. Maybe it's hard for me to hear that my partner doesn't like something I've been doing or would like something different. But the more I internally have a grown-up who has cultivated a caring inner dialogue, who has cared for my inner little in such a way that I've allowed for a maturation process under the caring guidance of my wiser self, then again, just the more likely we are to be able to come into the bedroom and say, hey, the other side of it, to say, hey, there are things that give me pleasure. Can we explore those things together? The more likely I am to say in my relationship, I don't like the way you're speaking to me. And as much as I'm afraid of losing you, if I stand up for myself here, I cannot deny that this doesn't feel good. And I'm going to risk losing your attention in order to honor myself. These dialogues are ultimately more complex, but this is how I'm just giving an overview of how these things are tied together. And so in this, I'm just giving this overview, but we're looking at how this is tied together. And what I want to propose in this episode is an inquiry to support this process for you. And so I wonder if you can take a moment to see your small self. And very obviously, this is work that can be done really in depth. I'm just giving an opportunity for a little taste, just opening the door so that you might see or feel what that little one may have felt they needed to do in order to be accepted, to be okay within the family unit, to not be harmed. And I'll give a really simple example. For me, because I had one parent who was really volatile and unsafe, one of the things my little self decided is that if I could do everything perfect, because I was often, trying to figure out what this caretaker, what would set them off and what wouldn't. And I figured if I could figure it out and do everything perfect and never make a mistake, then I would be safe, right? That would create a safer environment for me. And I believed this so much. I internalized it so much that it became any time in my life, well after I was even close to that caretaker at all, any time in my life, if I made a mistake, I'd be incredibly hard on myself because there was no room for that kind of mistake if I was going to keep being okay. And initially, it was about being okay to receive what I believed was love or to receive just the need being met of having the care that I needed. And then it just developed into, I just carried it with me into my adult life, even when I wasn't in circumstances that were unsafe for me. And just to give a couple of other ideas, because we're all so different with the things that motivated us. And also there would be multiple things, right? I'm just giving a few examples. Another one might be if our caretaker seems unstable, like maybe emotionally. And there might be an idea that if I'm the rock, if I never have any of my own problems and I can learn how to be there for them, then I'll be okay. And that's going to be my strategy now for getting my needs met, for getting love. Or even we can go to a little bit of a different angle. Maybe I only got care and attention when I was an absolute mess. Maybe there was a fair amount of neglect if everything was going okay. And if I broke a bone, or if I threw a tantrum, or if I suddenly, whether it was positive or negative attention, I was getting some of that care and attention and maybe something I translated as love. So this could also be something of an idea that I have to be a mess or I have to be in crisis in order to get love. So these are just the kind of things, and it's almost as if you could pull aside a little curtain and see your little self there, and maybe see them. Maybe you see a scenario that's happening in your family, and see what did that little think they needed to do in order to be okay. I'm going to use both of those things. Maybe it was just in order to be okay, and maybe it was all the way into you can see what they felt they needed to do in order to get love. So maybe you're just listening to this as an idea now, and it's something that you can think about later when you have some more space, or maybe when you're supported in some way. This is a great thing to get some support on. But just seeing that scene, for example, like for me, I'm going to see myself in that moment that I've decided if I can just get everything right, if I can just get it perfect. And I'm seeing that little one developing that idea. I'm seeing her in some circumstance where she feels she needs to employ that. And then I'm just going to bend down. My adult self, my wiser self is going to, in this vision that I'm having, I'm going to crouch down to her level. And I'm just going to send some love and tenderness and care directly to her. And maybe reach out a hand to that little one. This is the kind of thing that you can be doing at home if you'd like to follow along, or maybe think about later. First, you're sending love, and then maybe reaching out a hand and seeing if they'll come toward you. And everyone's going to be different here, right? It might take time to build trust. It might take time before you might notice that your little you has no interest in hanging out with you right now. Maybe your inner voice has been in that cruel state where they're having a little trouble trusting you. This is where, again, this gets much more complex than what I can share in a podcast. But perhaps you're sending them some love. You're reaching out your hand to them. Perhaps they're willing to come toward you and they'll hold your hand and you can feel their little hand in yours. And maybe you just give them some care and love, or maybe there's some wisdom that your grown-up self has learned. Maybe something that you would say to a niece or a child that's in your life that you love. Maybe talk to them about how you understand that it's hard, and maybe give them a hug. Maybe they want to talk. Maybe the care that they're looking for is to just be heard, maybe to cry. And that's the beginning. This is how we begin that relationship. We take a couple of steps toward first awareness. We see them. We see maybe some of that pattern developing. And then we see if we can share love with them and make a safe space for them to share with us. And that's the beginning, just like beginning or building any new relationship. Or maybe like beginning a new relationship with a child who really needs some care and tenderness and understanding. So that's maybe step 2, is beginning that relationship with that young aspect of yourself and being a part of a process with them of getting to know them and allowing them space to feel what they're feeling. If we're talking about how this all starts to translate into your sex life and your relating life, you can ask yourself the question, for example, what part of me have I not allowed into my sex life? Maybe it's the part of me that gets to say what I mean or what works for me. Is it the part of me, if we think about relationship, the part of me that feels like it's okay to set a boundary, that I don't want to be spoken to in a certain way? And it can be so terrifying in adult relationships, because if I'm going to take impeccable care of myself and bring more or all of myself to this partnership or to this moment, I run the risk of not being seen, not being cared for. I run the risk of being left. And especially if internally from a very young age, I developed an idea that I'm going to use my example, that I have to do it right in order to be seen, in order to be accepted, in order to not be left. And so then I'm risking everything that my little brain built myself on. I built my thought on how I built the thought of what love is and how I can receive it. And I have to risk it, and I can risk challenging that belief because I've developed the relationship with myself, or I've slowly over time taught myself, it's okay to have needs. And whatever happens, you're going to be okay. And if this person leaves you because hearing that you have a need or even a desire, or that something doesn't feel good or right for you, if that pushes them away, if you lose them because of that, I've got you. I'm going to be right here holding you and reminding you that you deserve to be loved for all of you. And that I that's got you, that's the you, the grown-up you that's cultivated that relationship with the small you. That's why that cultivation and that internal maturation is so vital for our grown-up relationships, because in order to challenge that idea that we created in our very young life, in order to take the chance when everything in our young brain that we've built most of our current life on is saying, you will be left if you do this. You will be left if you have a need. You will be left if you make trouble. You will be left if you don't give this person everything that they need. You will be left if you assert a boundary that they don't like. The structure that's going to allow us to take that chance and bring more of ourself to the partnership is the structure that's built, that I've got you, that is built from getting to know your little, understanding their motivation of why they felt they needed to do these things, and then caring for them, understanding how hard it was for them, and little by little letting them know what love is outside of that limited place where they believed or the things they thought they had to do in order to get it. And of course, that means finding in yourself that some wisdom that may have to come from beyond yourself in some way, that these things are true, that there is a bigger world where you will be loved and supported beyond just trying to behave in a way where you will get your needs met. Again, this is way more complex than a podcast can hold, but I think handing you this context, whether it's new for you or whether it's something that you're digesting on a new level, starts to create a little bit of new scaffolding. And of course, when we're navigating these things, when we're beginning to care for ourselves and bring more of ourselves to our relationships, of course, there's additional things and complications, because not only am I having a process and is my inner little in the room having opinions and thoughts, but also so is this other human being that I'm in a relationship with. And so, of course, there's complexities of how all of these things interrelate with one another, how one person's pattern pings the other person's pattern, how shifting a dynamic can start to affect the connection of all of these things. And that's, of course, much more complex. And this is the kind of thing that I work with people one-on-one with. And so while I can't speak directly to exactly what's happening in your partnership right now or what will happen as you start to bring more of yourself into the relationship, into the bedroom, what I can say is that if you begin this inquiry, if you begin this relationship with this small part of you, if you begin to recognize that things may not be how your little brain decided they were in order to receive love, and you begin to mature internally, and you start bringing more of yourself, even if initially that's incredibly rocky, those few building blocks on the path are really important ones for getting into a place of wholeness in relationships, of maturation, of a new kind of relationship that can meet your needs, of a new way that could show you that love is maybe not what you defined it as a tiny child within the dynamics of your family unit. So I hope that this has opened some doors of curiosity. I think that that's kind of the best we can hope for from a podcast that's covering things that have so many layers, is just, I hope this has opened a door of curiosity, of inquiry, and maybe of care. I want to say it's not difficult to start loving the little inside of you, and yet it may be. Again, it's just so hard to not be obtuse when you're speaking to so many people at once. And I do my best to try to be nuanced. I guess the more nuanced way to say this is that you, no matter what happens, if you begin the process of connecting with your inner little, you will start to get some really valuable information. If that process is challenging, that's valuable information. If it's hard to even connect with the idea of your little, that's valuable information. If your inner little, if you see your inner little and they're just absolutely so thirsty for love, that's great information. If they're thirsty for love and you feel in your adult self that you're not quite sure how to give it to them, that's great information. So there's no real way to go wrong here. And there's lots of different ways where you may become aware of places where you could use a little bit of extra care and support, maybe from someone outside yourself, to help you fortify this relationship that can literally change every single thing about who you bring to your relationships and the way that you engage in relationships and engage in connection and lovemaking. So thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this, please follow or subscribe. And while you're there, give us 5 stars. I love to see the 5-star reviews. I really appreciate those of you who've done that for me. And write us a review. I love the reviews. You can do that on Apple Podcasts for sure. Not so much on Spotify, I don't think, but write me a review. Share an episode that you enjoyed with a friend. It really helps. I love to get more people hearing this and becoming aware of this work. And if you are interested in learning more about my work or booking a session or joining a retreat or working with me directly, you can go to charumorgan.com and we will put a link to that in the show notes. And remember that if anything that I'm saying is landing for you in a way that you are wanting more one-on-one support with, customized support, as I said in the beginning of the episode, this is something you can learn about at charumorgan.com/sessions. And again, we'll put a link to that in the show notes. Thank you again for being here, and I will talk to you next week.